The key turned in the children's room lock, and my heart collapsed inside my chest like a building being imploded. The metallic sound echoed through the hallway of the house I helped buy, piercing my soul like a sharp blade plunged into raw flesh. I froze in the living room entrance, gift bag still hanging from my tired arms, as I watched my son-in-law Rodrigo slide the key into his pants pocket with that cold smile I had learned to despise. His eyes met mine with a calculated, cruel indifference, as if I were just an inconvenient obstacle in his path. "Rodrigo, what are you doing?" My voice came out shaky, but firm, carrying the weight of 5 decades of life and dignity. He turned slowly, each movement deliberate, designed to make me feel small. "Protecting my children, Mrs. Helena, so your grandmother doesn't ruin their day with her old ideas and suffocating way of being." The words came out of his mouth like distilled poison, each syllable chosen to hurt. "They don't need your presence today. Besides, I don't know why you came without telling us, as if I needed permission to visit my own grandchildren, as if the birthday presents I was carrying for Miguel, who was turning 7 that day, were an invasion and not an act of love." I heard Sophia's muffled crying behind the locked door, her little hands banging on the wood, calling for me with that high-pitched voice that still reminded me of when my own daughter was a child. "Grandma, Grandma Helena, I want Grandma." Something inside me cracked like ice under pressure. It wasn't just the indignation at the disrespect, it was the accumulated revolt of 3 years watching this man turn my daughter into a shadow of what she once was. 3 years seeing Beatrice disappear little by little, her light going out like a candle being suffocated by a glass dome. And now he was doing it with my children, using them as weapons in his perverse game of control. "Where's Beatrice?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain controlled although my blood was boiling in my veins. "Your daughter is resting. The doctor recommended absolute rest." He crossed his arms, physically blocking my passage through the hallway. "And I suggest you leave before she wakes up and gets stressed with another one of your dramatic visits." Dramatic. He called my maternal concern dramatic. He called my love suffocating. But I knew the truth he hid behind those rehearsed words and that impeccable suit. I knew because I had felt the despair in Beatrice's voice during that call at 3 in the morning, 2 weeks ago, when she whispered, "Mom, I can't take it anymore," before the call was abruptly ended. I knew because I saw the marks of eternal tiredness under her eyes whenever I managed to see her, the way she shrank when he entered the room, turning into something smaller, less vibrant, less alive. But at that moment, standing before that man I had considered good enough for my daughter just 4 years ago, I said nothing. I turned and left, carrying the presents back to the car, feeling the weight of humiliation burn my throat like bile. Tears streamed down my face as I drove through the familiar streets of the city where I was born, where I raised Beatrice alone after my husband decided he preferred a life without responsibilities when our daughter was only 3 years old. I let the pain overflow because I knew that when I got home, I would need to transform it into something more powerful, into strategy, into action. 27 years ago, I held newborn Beatrice in my arms in a public hospital room at just 19 years old, without a husband by my side, without money in the bank, with only one absolute certainty burning in my chest like an implacable sun. I would do anything to give her the life she deserved. I worked 2 jobs for years, cleaning offices at night while she slept in the city hall's daycare, selling cosmetics during the day to supplement the meager income that barely paid the rent for our little room on the outskirts. My hands became calloused. My back ached constantly, but every time I saw Beatrice's smile when I got home, every time she hugged me with those skinny little arms and said, "I love you, Mom," I knew it was worth every sacrifice. I saved every penny for 15 years to buy our own house, a small but dignified 2-story house in a middle-class neighborhood where Beatrice could study in good public schools, where she could have friends without being ashamed of where she lived. I watched her grow intelligent, strong, independent, graduating in administration with a full scholarship from a private university, getting an excellent job in a logistics company. My daughter was every cultural adaptations. Kulina remains unchanged as it's a classic and recognizable name in English. Rodrigo could be adapted to Rick for a more casual and potentially negative connotation, or remain as Rodrigo depending on the desired impact. Beatrice could be changed to Beatrice for a more familiar English spelling. Miguel and Sofia remain unchanged, as these are now common names in English-speaking countries. Donna, this title of respect doesn't have a direct English equivalent. Best to simply use Mrs. when Rodrigo is speaking formally to Helena. City Hall's daycare, better to use community daycare or local daycare to reflect the more common term. Periferia, replace with the outskirts or the wrong side of the tracks. Sobrado, best to say 2-story house for clarity. Barrio Clase Media, replace with middle-class neighborhood. Universidad Particular con Bolsa Integral, adapt to private university on a full scholarship. What I dreamed she would be: educated, cultured, self-confident, free. until she met Rodrigo. He appeared in her life like a Prince Charming from the fairy tales we read together when she was little, handsome, successful as a regional manager in a multinational corporation, from a traditional family in the city. At first I was seduced by the illusion as much as she was. He was polite to me, always punctual, giving Beatrice dinners at expensive restaurants, weekend trips. He seemed genuinely in love with my daughter, and I, who had suffered so much from abandonment and loneliness, wanted to believe that she had found the true love that I never had. The signs were there from the beginning, subtle as cracks in a porcelain vase, invisible until you look from a certain angle under the right light. The seemingly innocent comments about Beatrice's clothes being a little too provocative for work, the way he always forgot his wallet when we went out together, forcing Beatrice to pay even though she earned much less. The way he monopolized the conversation at family gatherings, turning every story she told into an opportunity to correct her or complete it with what she meant was. The jokes about my profession as an administrative assistant, about our humble origins, disguised as humor but sharp as razors. If only I had paid attention to the discomfort in my stomach when he convinced Beatrice to give up the promotion that would transfer her to São Paulo, saying that a wife should prioritize marriage. If only I had questioned more when he insisted that she quit her job as soon as she became pregnant with Miguel, arguing that a real mother stays home with her children in the early years. Each decision seemed reasonable in isolation, but together they formed an invisible web, trapping my daughter more and more firmly in a prison built with meticulous care. The wedding took place in a luxurious ceremony that his family paid for, making it clear through every detail that Beatrice was moving up in life, that she should be grateful for the opportunity to be part of that privileged circle. I smiled in the photos, wore the expensive dress that Beatrice's mother-in-law chose for me, pretended not to notice the condescending looks from his relatives, the whispered conversations about that woman who raised the girl alone, said with a mixture of pity and contempt. I helped financially with what I could for their house, using the savings I had put together for my retirement, because I wanted my daughter to have security, because Rodrigo said they needed help with the down payment on the property, even though he earned much more than I would ever earn in my entire life. 20,000 reais that disappeared like water between my fingers, without a receipt, without a formal agreement, just the promise that it was an investment in Beatrice's happiness. And then the visits began to be discouraged. First subtly, with Rodrigo always having some important commitment when I arranged to go, or saying that the children were sick, or that Beatrice was too tired to receive visitors, then more directly, establishing appropriate times that coincided exactly with my work, suggesting that I call before so as not to catch them by surprise, turning my presence in my own daughter's life into something that needed to be scheduled, controlled, allowed. Beatrice changed. The vibrant woman I had raised was being replaced by a pale and silent version of herself. She stopped calling me spontaneously. Our telephone conversations became short, full of uncomfortable pauses, as if she was always afraid of saying something wrong. When I asked if everything was okay, she assured me that it was with a voice without conviction, quickly changing the subject. The eyes that once shone with dreams and ambitions now seemed extinguished, resigned, defeated. If you are following this account and identify with stories of overcoming, struggle and family love, consider subscribing to this channel. Sharing these experiences strengthens us mutually, reminding us that we are not alone in our silent battles. It was my friend Margareta, a social worker with 30 years of experience, who finally named what I had been witnessing but refused to accept. We were having coffee in my kitchen when I told her about the increasingly rare visits, about how Beatrice seemed scared on the phone, about the bruises on her arm that she justified as, "I'm so clumsy, Mom, always bumping into things." Helena, Margareta held my hand on the table with that gentle firmness that only those who work with human suffering develop. This is called psychological violence, isolation, coercive control, and it can evolve into something much worse. She handed me information leaflets, telephone numbers of cultural adaptation for English-speaking audience, what I dreamed she would be. Educated, cultured, self-confident, free, until she met Mark. He appeared in her life like a Prince Charming from a storybook, handsome, successful as a regional manager at a Fortune 500 company, from a well-respected family in town. At first, I was as charmed as she was. He was polite to me, always on time, taking Sarah to fancy restaurants and weekend getaways. He seemed genuinely in love with my daughter, and I, who'd been through so much heartache and loneliness, wanted to believe she'd found the true love I never had. The signs were there from the beginning, subtle as hairline cracks in fine china, invisible until you looked at just the right angle. The seemingly innocent comments about Sarah's outfits being a little too revealing for the office. The way he always forgot his wallet when we were out, leaving Sarah to pay even though she earned less. The way he dominated the conversation at family dinners, turning every story she told into a chance to correct her or add what she meant to say was. The jokes about my job as a secretary, about our humble beginnings, disguised as humor but sharp as a knife. If only I'd paid attention to the knot in my stomach when he talked Sarah out of that promotion that would have moved her to Chicago, saying that a wife should put her marriage first. If only I'd questioned it more when he insisted she quit her job as soon as she was pregnant with Michael, arguing that a real mother stays home with her kids in the early years. Each decision seemed reasonable on its own, but together they wove an invisible web, trapping my daughter tighter and tighter in a carefully constructed prison. The wedding was a lavish affair paid for by his family, making it clear in every detail that Sarah was marrying up, that she should be grateful for the opportunity to join their elite circle. I smiled in the photos, wore the expensive dress Mark's mother picked out for me, and pretended not to notice the condescending looks from his relatives, the whispered comments about that single mom who raised her, said with a mixture of pity and disdain. I chipped in with what I could for their house, using my retirement savings, because I wanted my daughter to be secure, because Mark said they needed help with the down payment, even though he earned more than I ever would in my life. $20,000 that vanished without a trace, no receipt, no formal agreement, just the promise that it was an investment in Sarah's happiness, and then the visits started to become less frequent, first subtly, with Mark always having some important meeting when I suggested coming over, or saying the kids were sick, or that Sarah was too tired to have company. Then more directly, establishing convenient times that always coincided with my work schedule, suggesting I call first so as not to drop in unannounced, turning my presence in my own daughter's life into something that needed to be scheduled, controlled, permitted. Sarah changed. The vibrant woman I'd raised was being replaced by a pale, silent version of herself. She stopped calling me just to chat. Our phone conversations became short, full of awkward pauses, as if she was always afraid of saying the wrong thing. When I asked if she was okay, she'd say she was fine in a voice that didn't convince me, then quickly change the subject. Her eyes, which used to shine with dreams and ambition, now seemed dull, resigned, defeated. If you're relating to this story and connect with tales of resilience, struggle, and family love, please subscribe to the channel. Sharing these experiences gives us strength and reminds us we're not alone in our silent battles. It was my friend Margaret, a social worker with 30 years of experience, who finally put a name to what I was seeing but didn't want to believe. We were having coffee in my kitchen when I told her about the increasingly infrequent visits, how Sarah seemed frightened on the phone, the bruises on her arm she explained away as, "I'm such a klutz, Mom, always bumping into things." Helen. Margaret took my hand over the table with that gentle strength only those who work with human suffering develop. This is called emotional abuse, isolation, coercive control, and it can escalate to something much worse. She gave me pamphlets, phone numbers of support centers, explained to me the typical patterns of abusive relationships with a clinical clarity that made me feel simultaneously validated and terrified. I tried to talk to Beatrice several times, carefully choosing my words to avoid sounding accusatory, to avoid pushing her away even further, but each attempt was met with defensiveness, with automatic justifications, with assurances that I was exaggerating, that Rodrigo was just protective, traditional, a good father and husband. Her denial was a wall that I couldn't penetrate, built brick by brick through years of systematic manipulation. And now, 3 years into this suffocating marriage, things had reached this point, my grandchildren being locked in a room to keep me from seeing them on Miguel's birthday. I arrived home that afternoon with a cold determination crystallizing inside me like water turning to ice. I called Margareta, my lawyer, a cousin who worked in the family court of the forum. I started documenting everything. Dates of denied visits, screenshots of messages where Rodrigo invented excuses, recordings of calls where Beatriz clearly sounded under pressure. I found out through an acquaintance who worked at the same company that Beatriz hadn't voluntarily resigned as he claimed, but had been coerced through constant emotional blackmail about being a bad mother for working outside the home. For 2 weeks, I built my case with the precision of a goldsmith assembling a jewel, each piece of evidence a diamond being carefully placed in its setting. I talked to Beatriz's neighbors, who confirmed frequent shouting coming from the house, saw Rodrigo prevent her from going out alone multiple times, witnessed the children crying behind locked doors. A neighbor named Dona Amelia, a 70-year-old lady with sad and wise eyes, told me that she had already called the police twice upon hearing violent arguments, but Beatriz always denied any problems when the officers arrived. "I recognize the signs, dear," she told me while serving coffee in delicate porcelain cups in her room, decorated with old photos. "I lived through it in my first marriage 40 years ago. Back then nobody talked about these things. Women just endured in silence until they died inside or out." Her hands trembled slightly as she held the cup. "Don't let your daughter become a statistic, Helena. Don't let her lose more years of life trapped in this well-decorated hell." It was Dona Amelia who told me the secret that would change everything. One morning, she saw Rodrigo hurrying out of the house with a blonde and elegant woman, getting into his car with unmistakable intimacy, while Beatriz slept after having spent the night awake with Sophia sick. She had pictures, clear, dated, irrefutable pictures, taken through the window of her room that overlooked Beatriz's driveway. Rodrigo, the traditional and protective husband, the zealous father worried about preserving his family from the bad influence of his mother-in-law, had been having an affair for at least 8 months. He always parks that lady's car 3 blocks away so nobody sees, Dona Amelia explained while showing me the images on her tablet with surprising efficiency for someone her age. But I have insomnia and often drink coffee looking out the window early in the morning. I've seen it happen at least 15 times. She stays in there for 2-3 hours while Beatrice takes care of the children alone, thinking her husband is at work. The hypocrisy was so grotesque that it almost made me laugh with rage. He isolated Beatrice from the world, controlled every aspect of her life in the name of family sanctity, while systematically betraying her, using the time he should be spending with his children to be with another woman. The veneer of respectability that covered his cruelty was cracking, revealing the rot underneath. I arranged a meeting with Beatrice without informing Rodrigo, showing up at her house at a time I knew he would be at work. My daughter opened the door with Miguel in her arms and Sofia clinging to her leg, her eyes red from recent crying, her hair disheveled, wearing a worn-out robe at 2 in the afternoon. The impeccable house in the background contrasted cruelly with her state of devastation. "Mom, I can't have you over now," she began automatically, the rehearsed phrase leaving her mouth like a conditioned reflex. "Rodrigo doesn't like when Beatrice." My voice cut through the air with a firmness that made her stop talking. "I'm not asking for permission. Either you let me in now, or I call the police and report that you are keeping my grandchildren in a dangerous situation. Choose." Something in my tone must have communicated that I was no longer playing their game, was no longer accepting the imposed rules. She backed away, allowing me in, and I closed the door behind me. I confronted her with a definitive click. We sat at the kitchen table while the children played in the living room under our watchful eyes. I placed the tablet on the table with the photos of Richard and the other woman clearly visible. I watched the blood drain from Beatrice's face, her skin turning a sickly pale, her lips trembling as she tried to process what she was seeing. "He said she was a co-worker," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He said they were just important meetings he needed to have outside the office. Beatrice, look at me." I waited until her eyes, now filled with tears, met mine. "You don't deserve this. Nothing you did, said, or failed to do justifies the way he treats you. He's isolated you from me, from your family, your friends, your work, your identity, and on top of that he cheats on you while making you feel like you're the problem. This isn't love, this is prison." The floodgates opened. Beatrice began to cry with an intensity that seemed to come from a deep, buried place, violent sobs shaking her thin body as she collapsed onto the table. I hugged my daughter as I hadn't been able to do for years, feeling her dissolve in my arms like a scared child, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that maybe I could reach her through the walls that Richard had built around her. "He convinced me that I was crazy, Mom," she confessed between sobs, "that my worries were paranoia, that I was dramatic, exaggerated, hysterical. He made me believe that being with him was the only good thing in my life, that without him I would be nothing, that I should be grateful he accepted me despite all my flaws." The words came out in a cathartic rush, years of compressed pain finally finding a voice. "I've lost myself, Mom. I look in the mirror and don't recognize the woman I see. Where did that strong girl you raised go? What happened to me? You haven't disappeared, my darling. You're just buried under all the garbage he threw on you. But we're going to dig you out, together." I held her face in my hands, forcing her to make eye contact. "I'm not going to abandon you in this. Never. But you need to want to get out. You need to choose to fight." We spent hours in that kitchen, while I showed her all the documentation I had gathered, explained her rights, the legal options, the resources available. I called Margaret, who came to the house and talked to Beatrice, with that combination of empathy and pragmatism that only experienced professionals can balance. When Richard came home from work that night, he found his wife, his mother-in-law, a social worker, and a lawyer sitting at his dining room table. His mask fell instantly. The polite and controlled man disappeared, replaced by someone with wild eyes and a shrill voice. "What's going on here? Helen, you have no right to invade my house, to poison my wife against me." He turned to Beatrice with barely contained fury. "Send these people away now, or you'll regret it." "No." Beatrice's voice was low but firm, and I felt pride explode in my chest like fireworks. "No, Richard, you don't give me orders anymore. You don't control me anymore. You don't make me believe I'm crazy anymore. I saw the photos. I know about your rendezvous. I know you lied about everything while making me feel guilty for every legitimate feeling I had." What followed was ugly. Richard alternating between rage, pleas, threats, attempts at manipulation, promises of change, all part of a predictable script that Margaret had prepared us to face. But this time, Beatrice wasn't alone. Every time she seemed to waver, one of us supported her, reminding her of the truth, of the reality he was trying to distort again. The lawyer presented the papers. Beatrice was requesting a restraining order, divorce, shared custody with supervision, and compensation for the $20,000 I had loaned, and which he had used as he saw fit, without ever including my name on any house document. There was enough evidence of psychological abuse, parental alienation, infidelity, and coercive control to build a solid case. Richard was forced to leave the house that same night, complying with the temporary restraining order that the lawyer had obtained based on the neighbors' testimonies and the risk assessment made by Margaret. I watched him leave with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Not for him, but for the lost illusion, for the years that Beatrice would never recover, for the innocence that the children would lose when they understood that their family was broken. But I also felt hope, because when I closed the door after he left, I turned and saw Beatrice hugging her children with a protective intensity that I recognized as my own. I saw a glimpse of the strong woman she had been, and could be again. Miguel and Sofia, frightened by the commotion, but sensing the shift in energy, snuggled against their mother, and for the first time in years, their house breathed with genuine freedom. The following months were brutal in different ways. Rodrigo hired expensive lawyers who tried to paint Beatrice as unstable, tried to use my interference as evidence that I was a negative influence, tried to disqualify the neighbors' testimonies. But the truth, when meticulously documented, has a weight that lies cannot overcome. The photos, the recordings, the depositions, all formed an undeniable portrait of a man who controlled, manipulated, and betrayed while feigning superior morality. His family tried to buy our silence, offering financial settlements if we dropped the most serious charges. We refused. This was never about money. It was about dignity, about justice, about ensuring that Miguel and Sofia grew up knowing that their father's behavior was unacceptable, that they didn't need to repeat those patterns in their own future lives. Beatrice began therapy, first reluctantly, then embracing the process with a veracity that reminded me of how she studied when young, determined to absorb all available knowledge. She began to understand the mechanisms of manipulation she had suffered, to name the tactics of control, to forgive herself for the permission she believed she had given to the abuse. She went back to working part-time, reconnected with old friends, slowly rebuilt an identity separate from the wife and mother that Rodrigo had demanded she be exclusively. The children also began child therapy, processing the confusion of having their lives turned upside down, learning appropriate vocabulary for their feelings, unlearning the toxic patterns they were already beginning to internalize. Sofia, only 5 years old, once told me while we were eating ice cream in the park, "Grandma, now Mommy smiles for real, not that sad smile she used to make." The divorce was finalized after 8 months of legal battle. Beatrice got to keep the house, primary custody of the children with supervised visitation for Rodrigo, and he was ordered to return the 20,000 reais that I had invested, with interest. More importantly, she emerged from the process not as a broken victim, but as an empowered survivor. Today, 2 years after that afternoon when I heard the key lock my grandchildren in a room, I sit in Beatrice's living room, our living room, because I now live with her and the children, sharing not only physical space, but the task of emotional reconstruction, watching Miguel and Sofia play freely, their laughter filling the room with a lightness that seemed impossible in those dark days. I learned that the dignity we build through difficult choices is more valuable than any peace bought through submission, that our worth does not diminish in the opinion of people who never truly valued us, that sometimes losing everything we thought we wanted is necessary to recover everything we really needed, our freedom, our identity, our power. When I look at Beatrice now, I see not only my daughter, but a woman who faced her darkest demons and chose light. A mother who is raising children, who will understand that healthy relationships are based on mutual respect, not control. A survivor who has transformed trauma into wisdom, pain into purpose. And when Miguel asks me, with that peculiar seriousness of children, "Grandma, why was Daddy?" Okay, here's the direct translation of the provided text block. Locked us in that day. I can answer with age-appropriate honesty, because sometimes adults make bad choices when they're afraid of losing control. But you were never the problem, and now you are safe. This is the lesson I carry in my heart like a banner of victory. Never underestimate the power of a mother, a grandmother, a woman who decides enough is enough. May our stories not end with silent resignation in the face of injustice, but with loud resistance that echoes through the generations. May we teach our daughters, sons, granddaughters and grandsons that healthy relationships are built on foundations of equality, not on sandcastles of control that inevitably crumble when the tide of truth finally arrives. The key that Rodrigo turned in that lock didn't just lock my grandchildren in a room. It unlocked my determination, unlocked the cage where Beatrice was trapped, opened doors that he believed he had sealed forever. And now, when I look at the 3 generations of strong women in this house, me, Beatrice, and little Sofia, who is growing up knowing that she will never need to ask permission to exist fully, I know that metallic sound of the key was actually the sound of chains breaking. We are free. And no lock in the world can lock freedom once you understand that you always carried the keys within yourself. We just needed to remember where they were.